I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right, thanks. Well, good morning. Welcome in, and let's get started for today. So this is week 4 out of our 5-week accelerator. We'll do a very quick recap here just to remind you of what each of the weeks was about. We talked about completing those registrations, and hopefully you are well on your way. Week 1, we did an overview of the SBIR and STTR programs. Week 2, we looked at the individual agencies. We also looked at scoping the project. And then week 3 was communicating with the program managers and a little bit of proposal writing. So with that, thank you for sending in your quad charts. I put comments on those and send it back to you. Please let me know if you have any questions about that. We won't dive into that during the main session today, but I can hang out a little bit after this meeting, or we can schedule a meeting to talk if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to discuss on that. So today we'll talk about budget. Oh, and real quick, we'll talk about budget and then a little bit of commercialization. We're not going super deep into that, and then we'll have the activities and homework. So some basic budget information. All agencies are going to require that you write out a budget. And then for every non-zero line item, they're also going to want budget justification. So there'll be two parts to the budget. Uh, Most agencies at this point have switched over to an online submission portal. So they'll have all of it there for you, and you just type in the numbers for each of the categories. Um, and then with that, they'll do the math for you to add everything up. Some agencies still will expect Excel documents and Word documents, but by and large, at this point, almost all of them, or at least the main ones, have switched over to an online submission portal. If you are interested in working with a sub-awardee, so that could be a research institution, it could be contractors, consultants, things like that. If you're interested in working with them, they will need to provide their own budget and budget documentation. So that's the same type of thing that you're doing, but they'll just have to create one on their own, and you'll add that onto your application. Um, if you need to bring in new employees to do some work, the positions don't have to start until the time of award. So that's not the time at submission. Meaning, if you have a principal investigator that is currently not fully employed, or excuse me, primarily employed by your small business, that's not a problem yet, as long as there are plans to change as soon as the award comes through. Once the award comes through, they need to be predominantly employed by your small business. Um, Same goes for any other positions that you would like to hire on. If you want, um, if you need somebody else to hire onto your project, assuming they're not key personnel, it's not a problem. Just in your budget, write in that you are expecting to hire somebody, give a job description for them, and then you can hire them at time of award. You don't have to have them hired prior to. Um, the project budget is going to be the amount of money necessary to see the project through to completion. So looking at the period of performance and all of the tasks that you have laid out. And all of the materials, of course. That's all going into the budget. So SBIR and STTR awards are firm fixed price. So that means that there is an award ceiling that cannot be increased in most cases. If you're interested in working with NIH, there is some flexibility there. Your budget is comprised of items, effort, work that's going to be done during the project, all of the cost to capture those items. You don't need to be price competitive here. So always try to get as close to the award ceiling as possible without going over. Make sure that you have justification for going that high, but there's no reason to try and use worse material or lower quality stuff to be able to pitch a lower price to potentially be more competitive. They're not interested in that. So you don't have to be competitive based on that. Know what your objectives are before trying to cost the effort. And so this is an important piece, and we'll actually look at two different methods of creating the budget. So this is one method that you can look at. Look at all the objectives, so that the 2 to 3 main objectives that you're trying to hit, and then look at all of the tasks underneath it, figure out how much work is going into it, take the employees that you have, principal investigator, any other personnel that you have, assign work hours to each of those tasks, and then figure out the budget for each of those employees. Factor in all of the costs for materials for each of them, and that is the first way that you can really figure out what your expected budget is. If you end up going over the award ceiling, make sure that you pull back a little bit, reduce some tasks, reduce hours, whatever you need to do to fit within the award ceiling. Level of effort calculations need to be tied to particular tasks. So as you're looking at all of the employees that you have and you're trying to calculate the salary that goes, or the hourly wage, or whatever it is that goes toward this project specifically, you'll need to make sure that the hours that you are assigning to them are tied to specific tasks. So what we're getting at here. Some agencies have a minimum effort commitment from the principal investigator. We talked about with an SBIR, the principal investigator needs to be predominantly employed by the small business. That's 51% or more of their time needs to be tied to the small business. Now, with some agencies, and I'm going to use NSF as an example here, they require that for every 6 months of the project, the principal investigator must have 1 month of time spent directly working on the project. So that's not doing administrative work, that's not doing other business related tasks. That's the principal investigator must be doing work on the project specifically. So that's the R&D work. It has to be 1 month of time for every 6 months of time on the project. As you are looking at your personnel and the time that they have, don't have anyone at 100% labor on the project. There's always other stuff that needs to be done. And of course, this is very important for the principal investigator. Try and get about 80% of their time. Of course, like I said, there are always other non-project business activities that need to happen. The budget is going to be driven by your objectives and the scope. And of course, all of this really ties in together. So the scope could encompass the objectives depending on how you look at it. What are you going to test during the project? And how do you plan to validate those results? Identify the 3 to 4 technical objectives. We talked about potentially reducing that down to 2 to 3 in a prior session. And then list the required tasks under each of those objectives. So a Gantt chart is a pretty easy way, and it's a good way to visualize the work that's being done. We've talked about this a little bit previously. But here we've got just a quick example with objective 2, an explanation of what objective 2 would be, and then the tasks underneath that are tied into objective 2. And then you see the Gantt chart shows the time that's being allocated based on how many boxes are filled, and these boxes can be separated based on weeks or months, or depending on your project, it could be longer than that. But pick a time frame that works for your particular situation, and then you can fill in how many of those time intervals make sense for that task. And you can also put this, it shows throughout the year when the tasks are being done. Additionally, you can use this and create another column that shows the employees that are working toward that. So you can pretty quickly visualize which employees are spending how much time on each of these tasks, and then tie those tasks into the objectives that you're working on for the project. It's a pretty quick way to visualize, and it helps the reader. It also helps you as you are working on the budget.
John, I have a question. So is this chart should be like part of the work plan?
Yes, you can add a Gantt chart into the end of the work plan. Yes. Mhm. You should have a clear picture of the work that's going to be done. And of course, if you are coming up with this, if you're coming up with a project, you know everything that needs to be done. You know your team and who's going to be working on it. And so you should be able to pretty quickly show what's going on and then tie that into the budget. It may take a couple of iterations. You might go through this process and realize you're over budget. You might go through this process and realize that you're under budget. And so whatever it is, you can then adjust in your next round to get closer to that award ceiling. So there are two ways to look at the budget and how to calculate um, all of the expenses that are going toward that, and how to get as close to that award ceiling as possible. We've talked about this bottom one, completing the work plan, and then all of the expected labor and costs, and trying to get as close to the award ceiling as possible. We call that from sort of the bottom up. And then you can work backwards from the top down. So looking at the award ceiling and then bringing it down through all of your expenses and then separating it out accordingly. So we're going to talk about that piece next. If we are starting with a total budget, assume here in our example a budget of $275,000. If this is the total allowable cost for a phase one, the first thing that you're going to want to do is pull out the fee and profit. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. But just as a quick introduction to fee and profit, all of these agencies will allow you to take 7% of the total budget and just put it in your pocket. And so you don't have to explain where that money is going. And so you can use this as a lifeline, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you can use this as a lifeline for any unallowable costs. If anything goes wrong, this can help you out. So starting at the very top, we take that 7% out. And so here the 7% is $19,200. So we start with our total award ceiling, the 275,000, subtract out our 7% fee, and then our total allowable budget for the work, now this is direct and indirect, is $255,800. So now we know, starting from the top and work backwards, this is as much as we have to work with and put toward the effort. We've thrown in a little twist here. So if you're interested in working with STTR, there's a 30% that has to be allocated to a research institution. So if you're working with STTR, you take your total allowable amount. Now, of course, this is after fee and profit. So your $255,800 of money that could be allocated toward the direct effort. Then you take out 30%, leaving you with 179,000 and some change. Then you take out your indirect costs. So currently the indirect costs have been reduced. Previously they were 40%. Now it looks like the generally accepted indirect cost is about 15%, which is significantly less. So you will have to think about where your costs are going in regards to indirect rate. That does, however, put you with more funding that has to be spent toward direct costs. I believe that the idea is that more work will get done with the same amount of money. If it actually plays out that way, I'm not sure. This is the first full year where we are seeing this. So yet to be determined if this actually works the way that they expect it to. But with our 70% at this point, minus the other 7%. So we're looking at 63% of our original award ceiling. We're looking at the $179,060 minus 15% brings us to $152,201 as the direct pool. So the 15% was removed. That's the indirect. That's what can go toward general administrative costs, and we'll look at that in just a minute. And then $152,200 going toward the direct work. So this is the actual research and development. Some agencies have required travel. Most of them don't. I believe NSF does have required travel where they want the PI, potentially one other person with the PI, to go to a conference in Washington, D.C. But most agencies don't have any travel, and in a phase one, they actually prefer that you don't do any traveling. So pay attention to the solicitation and what they're asking for. For most projects, the bulk of the work is going toward that R&D labor. That's what's expected. And keep in mind, you're not working on a prototype in a phase one. You're testing feasibility. I think I got ahead of myself just a little bit here, but that's okay. Make sure that your phase one budget really reflects that you are focusing on the 2 to 3 technical hurdles. Those are really the objectives that we've talked about, and that the direct effort, is going toward figuring out those problems that you've identified. The budget figures may be based, or they must be based in reality and easily verifiable. So when we talk about that, you need to have all of the justification for why you are including those costs. So that means that for each of your objectives broken down into each of those tasks, you know an expected amount of materials or the cost for the materials that are going into each of those. If you're getting quotes on materials or quotes on any contracted work, you need to have those quotes readily available just in case you are asked to justify any of those costs. And then when you are looking at the labor costs, there are 2 ways that you can look at that. So there's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as BLS, and then GSA, and I always forget what GSA stands for, but both of those websites are available. And if you type in the title of the position that you're paying, so program manager, program director, it could be software specialist, you could have technicians, whatever the title is. If you type that in, you can find what's generally accepted for pay at that level. And you can find that here. And so if you have numbers that are based on these websites, it's very easy to justify those costs. One of these will give you a higher number than the other. And I've at this point forgotten which. I should go back and make sure to take notes on that. But one of them will give you a higher number than the other, and they're including fringe rate in the higher number. So keep that in mind as you're looking at both of these websites. In the budget for SBIR, there are some things that you are allowed to pay for and some things you're not allowed to pay for. So things you can pay for: salary, fringe benefits, material supplies, subawards, of course, within the limits, consultants, again, within the limits, accounting services, and of course, your fee and profit. There are things that you're not allowed to pay for. We've got those here as lawyers. If you're looking at patents, we've got any sort of marketing work, equipment. This is agency specific, but in a phase one, please don't purchase any equipment. Construction and lab creation, you can't pay for that. Travel, again, this is agency specific. If the agency allows it, and if you include travel, you must have very strong justification for that travel. Most of them will push back, even if it is an allowable cost for that agency. You're not allowed to pay for any publishing costs or customer discovery. This is, again, is agency specific, and we'll talk about a caveat to that in just a minute. But generally speaking, the funding for phase one SBIR should go to R&D, not toward customer discovery or any of these other allowable costs. So generally speaking, the agency will require you to explain all of these different pieces. Well, you don't have to explain fee and profit, but you'll have to have line items for all of these different pieces. Now, with an STTR, you'll have all of the same components in your budget as the SBIR, but you'll also have a subaward requirement that you'll have to include. And so the subaward, they will create a budget and they'll create their budget justification, same as you, and then you'll attach that to your application when you send it. And the direct costs, these are costs that are directly connected to the proposed scope of work. So again, generally speaking, we're talking labor costs and materials and supplies. If you need to, rent out a location or rent time using equipment, things like that, that can go into direct costs as well. Please do not purchase equipment or computers. Reason being is all of these agencies want to see that the money is being spent on items that are specifically required for this project. Things like computers can be used for a multitude of different applications and not just what you're doing in this SBIR. So they don't want to see that. And then equipment is really tricky, and you don't want to deal with equipment because if you purchase some expensive piece of equipment that is owned by the government, and so you will have to report on that every year until it appreciates down to, or excuse me, depreciates down to zero in terms of the value of that piece of equipment. And that could be many years after the manufacturer has closed. And so now you've got a piece of equipment that you can't really use sitting on a desk that you don't know what to do with, but you have to keep it, and you have to keep reporting on its condition every year until it depreciates to nothing. And that's a bigger hassle than anybody really wants to deal with. Travel is possible, but again, you will have to explain, assuming the agency does allow it, why you need to travel when in a phase one, you should be focusing on research work. Generally, you can do most, if not all, of the research in one place. And that's what we're getting at here. Subcontracts and consultants. There's usually just one line item that combines all of this. If you are working with subawardees, again, they will have to create their own budget and budget justification that you'll add in. Similarly with consultants, depending on how you're including the consultants. But we can talk about that a little bit later. Other direct costs, this is sort of a catch-all for everything else. And if you have other direct costs, one line item, but you'll have to explain what's in there. Indirect costs include fringe, overhead, and general and administrative work. And we've got descriptions of those here for you. So fringe isn't anything that comes with having employees like healthcare. Overhead, directly identifiable costs in running the business. It could be facility rental, depreciation, business contracts, things like that. And then general and administrative. So the cost of running business typically has some other cost drivers as well. Things that cannot be directly attributed to the particular project, but things that need to happen. This could be like accounting and things like that on the back end. Accounting, HR, those sorts of ideas. All of these go into indirect costs. And again, indirect for this year has been reduced to only 15% of the total budget. So you'll need to be strategic about which of these things you are planning to include in your budget. Typically, there's just one line item for indirect rate, and it just kind of lumps all of this together in your budget. Do you need to negotiate a rate for the SBIR? Kind of. If you are below that 15%, or you're at the 15%, you likely won't need to do any negotiations. If you try to go above that 15%, there's a good chance that you will have to sit down and talk to them about everything that's going into the 15% and why you would need to expand that. And then you would need negotiations for that. If you go into negotiations, some agencies will accept that negotiated rate on future awards. So if you go to negotiations, and I believe that NIH is a good example of this, and if you negotiate an accepted indirect rate with NIH in the future, you can use that same negotiated rate for future awards. Always check in the solicitation, because the way that you calculate the indirect rate can change based on the agency that you're working with. They also might have some different caps on that. Again, generally, I believe that 15% is accepted across the board. Some of them might still have up to 40%. but that will be agency specific. Definitely read the solicitation to make sure that you're not going over what's allowed. And there are a couple of different ways to look at it. So there's a cap on the percentage, which we can see with NIH. Department of War allows it to be rolled back into R&D efforts. And then NSF will allow you to do it a couple of different ways. So here we'll talk about that fee and profit a little bit more. All of the agencies will allow you to take fee and profit. Nobody should be expected to work for free, and that's what this is. You can take 7%, and this is all agencies will allow this. Some will allow more, so check with the solicitation to see what's acceptable. But that 7%, take it, put it in your pocket. Don't give any justification for what you're doing with that funding. Just say that it's fee and profit. And then, of course, you can use this as a lifeline later. We've got a little bit more math down here for you. If your total is 100,000, your fee and profit is going to be 7,000. So you could take that out, leaving you with $93,000 for all of the work that needs to be done. In an SBIR, that means up to 31%, or excuse me, $31,000 for all the subawards that you're going to do. So if you need to make any subawards, there's 31,000 available for that. And then 62,000 that is dedicated to you. Now, of course, you can absorb that 31,000 as well. That can go to you if you can do everything in-house. That 31 is an optional piece in an SBIR. In an STTR, it's different. So in an STTR, you've got $37,200 that goes to you, and there's $27,900 that goes to a research institution, which leaves you with $27,900 that can be split. It can go towards you, it could go toward the research institution, it could go toward a third party. However, it needs to be split. You're welcome to do that. Make sure that you take the fee and profit. Some people say that they don't need it, that everything's going to go perfectly, that nothing will ever go wrong in their project. Absolutely take the fee and profit. Things will go wrong. You will need to pivot. There's a chance that you'll have unallowable costs that, of course, you can't pay through your standard budget, but if you take your fee and profit, you could pay for it, right? If you need to pivot, if if equipment breaks, things like that, you need to pay for repairs, you can use the fee and profit for that. If you are working with a subawardee, the subawardee will need to provide their budget justification. I mentioned that a couple times. A letter of commitment showing that they do recognize that there is an agreement between the two of you and that they will be doing work assuming the project gets funded. So they'll need to provide that letter for you. And then bio sketches, if applicable. So check with the agency to see if they need to provide a bio sketch. Some say yes, some don't need it. And then they'll fill out the same bio sketch that you fill out. We've got some budget mistakes here that we wanted to warn you against. If you request little or no fee, that could be a mistake. Always take that fee. It just gives you a little bit extra to work with if things don't go exactly how you planned. If you request little or no indirect costs, you could be running pretty tight on budget in that case. So, please take the full amount. Again, it looks like it's going to be 15%, but whatever the solicitation allows, please take the full amount. If you don't utilize the full budget amount, again, this could be a problem if you're trying to be competitive and reduce what you're asking for. It doesn't make any difference to the agency. They're expecting to pay the full award ceiling. It doesn't help your case to try and request less. If you exceed the allowable budget amount, you'll get administratively disqualified and they'll just remove your application. Nobody will ever read it. Make sure you're not doing that. If you purchase a large piece of equipment in a phase one, again, that's going to be a nightmare for you as a small business to have to continue to report on that and even to justify the purchase in the first place. If you can rent it, if you can make a partnership with a research institution to be able to use their equipment, things like that. It makes it a lot easier on you. If you request high wages for key personnel without justification, of course you need to get paid. And all the key personnel need to be paid what they're worth. But if you're coming in requesting very high wages without justification, or if you're going above and beyond what GSA and um, the Bureau of Labor said, BLS, if you're going above and beyond what they are recommending you're getting paid, you will need to explain that. If you don't align the R&D plan with the budget, that's a problem. They will be comparing the two of those as they are reading. Consultants and subaward budget exceeds the limit. We've talked about what those limits are in an SBIR. That's 30% of the total funds. And then in an STTR, it has to be 30% up to 60% of the work. If your budget includes unallowable expenses, you'll get administratively removed for that as well. And then budget justification doesn't match the budget. So make sure that the narrative matches the numbers that you've explained. Any questions about budget? Yes, Olga, what have you got?
Yeah, so first of all, should the indirect rate be justified in the budget justification?
I believe that it should. It may not need to be a very detailed explanation.
Well, because from the previous experience, I remember I did not do that for indirect, but with all those changes, I'm not sure now. So that's the question. And the second one, so how we calculate that 7% fee? Because if you calculate it from the, let's say you put together all the numbers, direct, indirect, subawarding, and so on. So put together that's like, let's say 90,000, right? And you add, just to make it easier to calculate, you add 10% of the fee. That would be 99,000. But if you just take 10% out of 1,000, like the total, that would be 10,000 to divide, right? So that would be 94. Do you understand what I mean? So
I
that,
think and so we're talking about the two different methods.
yeah,
So
right.
adding up everything and then doing your fee and profit from all of your like accumulated costs, as opposed to going backwards and having your award ceiling, taking the fee and profit, and then
Yeah, yeah,
everything else on
exactly.
the budget. Right. Um, yes. The the way that we recommend preparing your budget is starting with the award ceiling, taking that 7% out from the very beginning, and then making sure that all of your other costs add all the way up to what's left. Right. So if we are looking at that earlier example, if you have $100,000 as your total budget, taking out $7,000 as your fee and profit, the 93,000 that's left over, do your absolute best to make sure that direct, indirect, subaward, everything adds up to the 93,000. Now, ultimately, it probably won't, right? You're going to have a very hard time getting exactly 93,000, but it gives you a ceiling of what you should shoot for. And there's a way through Excel that you can use goal seek. And we actually have an Excel document that I'll share after this, and you can play around with that. That will help you get as close to that 93,000 as possible. Now, ultimately, what you're going to have to do is once you get as close to the 93,000 as possible, maybe you only get to 92,500, right? You'll then have to go back and recalculate the fee and profit based on the new amount that you've got.
Oh, okay. And one more question. So the consultants could be paid from TABA, is that right?
Yes, actually, I'll talk about TABA in just a minute in the
Okay,
commercialization piece.
thank you.
Absolutely. And as far as going back to your first question about justifying the indirect rate, I will go back and check what the actual explanation is that they're looking for. I think some of that is sort of hidden in, you have to start the application process to really get a little bit more info than what's in the solicitation. But I'll read through the solicitations that I have and see if I have any more explanation on that. Additionally, since many of the applications now are moving to online forms and they do the math for you, right? And that you just type in what your expenses are. For the fee and profit, I've seen, at least in Department of War specifically, I've seen this, where they don't ask you for a number on the fee and profit. They don't ask you for the amount of money. They ask you for the percent that you're requesting. And so you just type in 7% and it does the math for you to calculate at the end what that 7% actually looks like.
Thank you. And also one question. So I like years ago, I've been attending one of the webinars, and I don't remember with who, but the speaker was Jim Greenwood, and he's been like excellent about explaining all the direct, indirect, how to calculate and everything. Are you guys planning to invite him to do like session or something?
We Two things. First, we have Larda, who used to be the TABA provider that was just like generally accepted as the TABA provider for these agencies. And we're working with them. We've got a couple of cohorts throughout the year where they're coming to explain. Second, we actually do have Jim Greenwood signed up to teach. I believe he's teaching a cohort based around aerospace technology. But in that, he's going to be talking about budget justification, things like that. All right, that's typically a piece of the puzzle. And so that very likely will be in there. I haven't actually seen what his curriculum looks like for this, but we do have him coming, and very likely it will be part of his session.
And where is that gonna be? Like, can I sign up?
Yes, here in the follow-up email, I'll put two things. First is a new website that well, he's my supervisor. So my supervisor created specifically for FAST and our new funding mechanism, EPS, which is really just an extension of FAST, as well as our Luma profile. So Luma is just where we have all of our events that you can register for. And so I'll send out links to both of those in the follow-up email today. And as soon as it's available, you'll see it pop up there. If it's not yet already, it might be there. Let me take a quick note for that. Good questions. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about commercialization. Generally speaking, of course, there's always more to it than what we can put on these slides. But generally speaking, you start with a concept. This is your idea that you're going to build your business on. You need to test the feasibility, see if it works. This is where SBIR comes in. You've got proof of concept. Again, this is part of SBIR. Market assessment. Now you can use some SBIR funding through TABA, which Olga just mentioned. We'll talk about that in just a couple slides here, to figure out what the market actually looks like and if you have a good path to entry, and then you take your product to market. And of course, that makes it sound super simple. But commercialization in SBIR is part of the framework of SBIR. That's why it was founded. It's not just the research and development. You have to have that piece. You also have to have your path to market. You have to put that into part of the purpose for your business. The process the process of bringing technology to market. Commercialization effort emphasis. I just mentioned this. So the commercial potential for your technology is very important to SBIR. Commercialization doesn't start after the technology has been developed, as our quote down here says. It should be considered from the beginning. So when you are thinking about your innovation, think about who's going to purchase it. Think about what problems you're solving. And that way you can start to come up with a profile for your beachhead market, for your early adopters, for the people that you're going to try and sell to. You're going to want to do some market research. Understand the competitive landscape, so who else is doing similar work, recognize technology trends and regulatory considerations. This is a very important piece. So what stands in your way between the development of your idea and actually putting it on the market? Gauge the commercial potential for your technology. Part of this, engaging the commercial potential, is looking at the market and who all's in it, how big the market is, things like that. But also, you'll want to start doing customer interviews. You'll want to talk to people that are potentially interested in purchasing this technology. And the reason is, in these interviews, you might find out that the person in your mind that you've identified is not actually the person that's going to purchase from you. There might be somebody else. You might also realize that the problem that you're trying to solve isn't really a big enough problem to warrant new technology. And so you want to make sure that you have these conversations early on so that you're not spending years and hundreds of thousands of dollars putting together some technology that there's not really a strong market for. So try and do this early, try and do it often. Customers' needs and wants change pretty frequently. And so you'll want to know who it is that you're targeting and what their problem is and how you're fixing it. You'll want to build your team. So include technical and business experts in your team. It's important, of course, to have people that understand the technology and can explain the tech. But if you don't understand the business principles behind the market and the market strategy, you're going to have a very hard time explaining why your business should get the SBIR funding as opposed to somebody else. Recruit industry advisors or partners to provide some insight into your target market. Now, you can do this as consultants, or you can reach out and have these customer interviews, whichever makes most sense for you and your business structure. Intellectual property strategy. You're going to want to understand what already exists, the current state of the art, and figure out how your innovation fits into that sort of ecosystem of technologies. If you have a patent already, great. You don't have to go for SBIR, so that's not a requirement. But it is something to think about, because if you want to keep this protected, if you want to license the technology out, if you want to potentially sell the license itself, or excuse me, the patent itself, you will need to have a patent in order to do that. And you can leverage that IP to add value to potential investors. So if you're trying to pitch this to venture capital or to angel investors, it does help to show that you have patents on your work, to show that it is secured, so other people aren't as likely to take it from you. Now, one potential deviation from the standard train of thought here, and I hear this every time I go to the SBIR conferences. There's always somebody sitting on a panel that says, don't worry about patenting your technology. And the reason they say that is patents take time that you may not want to spend fighting and explaining and justifying why you deserve a patent. Secondarily, once you have a patent, all of your information is disclosed under your patent. And that can be a problem, because if you have a large organization that finds your patent and steals your technology, the patent gives you a right to litigation. So it gives you a right to sue them. But if you're fighting someone like Boeing or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, now they're not likely to steal your innovation. But if you were fighting a large corporation like that, they've got the money and the team of lawyers to make sure that that litigation is a very expensive process for you, and that you as a small business will likely go bankrupt before you ever see the end of that lawsuit. So do with that information what you will. Most people will advise you to get a patent. Every now and then you find one person that says, don't worry about the patent, just move fast and be as quick as you can with your business to make as much money as you can, and then create the next innovation on the other side to continue making money. And don't worry about patents. So, two trains of thought there. I can't give you a best case on either of those and which one really to go for. Some things that you will need to think about in your commercialization plan, and as you're thinking about your business model, the value proposition. So, what are you doing that's different from everybody else? Why would people pay for your innovation as opposed to another thing that's on the market? Look at your business model. So, how are you going to create, deliver, and capture value? Your customer discovery, we talked about this a little bit, but find potential customers, have those interviews with them, figure out what their needs are, make sure that you are addressing a real problem that they have, and then also talk about their buying behavior. So, what is a solution to their problem worth to them? How much are they willing to spend? If they're only willing to spend $10, but your innovation when you first come out with it is going to be $50, even though you have the solution to the problem, they won't be willing to spend money on it. And so that will also impede your commercial success. So think about that as well as you're doing your customer interviews and customer discovery. The path to market is also something that is important to consider. Are you doing direct sales? Are you doing business to customer? Are you doing business to business? So who are you actually selling to? Are you licensing your technology to some other company? Like, have you created it and then you license it to somebody else who is actually going to use it and implement into a larger system? Are you simply going to sell the company after you have all of the intellectual property for it? Are you going to form strategic partnerships? So you and another business go in together on a new venture where you're using your technology combined with their technology to create something new? What's your plan? Requirements are going to vary by agency in this commercialization plan, but generally speaking, I think at this point, most agencies will require that you have a commercialization plan included in your application. The NIH has an emphasis on the importance of market-oriented approaches. So you're creating new medical devices or medical related technologies for NIH to fund, but NIH won't purchase it from you. So you'll have to show how you plan to actually sell that product. Department of War has a need and they will purchase it from you, but they also want to see you with a technology that will be useful in applications outside of military. They'll be your initial customer, but after they purchase however many units they need, now what? Right? So what are you going to do with your business after using Department of War as a potential customer? NSF wants high risk, high impact, so they're looking for societal and economic impact as well. So you'll need to include that in your application. So I think that I've shown this slide before, but we've got Department of War, Department of Energy, NASA, NIH, and NSF, and then what they call their commercialization plan, and then how many pages they're expecting in your commercial plan. So we'll get to TABA now. There actually has been a change in TABA. So TABA stands for Technical and Business Assistance. And you can receive this funding for expenses that are typically unallowable. Previously, it was agency specific as to if they gave you TABA and if it was in addition to or if it was subtracted from your award ceiling. Now, with the new reauthorization, all agencies have to provide TABA funding. In a phase one, that's $6,500. In a phase two, it's $50,000. Now, it's still up to the agency if this is in addition to or if this is subtracted from your award ceiling. So I believe NSF, and I heard Department of Homeland Security talking about this. Well, excuse me, it was DARPA. it was a DARPA representative talking about this previously, where this amount of funding, this $6,500, will be removed from the award ceiling. So if you have, $100,000 as the award ceiling, 6,500 of that can come out to be used toward TABA related expenses, which we have expanded, and I'll show you that. I believe it's on the next slide. So check with the agency solicitation to figure out how exactly that's going to work for you. You will need to add providers or subcontractors or consultants for this funding. And so you will need them to provide their budget and budget justification up to this amount. TABA funding, like I said, has changed a little bit and it has expanded. So first, before I jump into the details here, previously, and I just mentioned this a little bit ago, LARDA was just the generally accepted TABA provider across all agencies that offered TABA. That is no longer the case. And so they do not have a generally accepted default TABA provider. If you're interested in using this pool of money, you will need to find a provider that's going to work with you. You can still reach out to LARDA if you would like to work with them, or you can work with somebody local or whoever you'd like. Essentially, this is a subcontract that you're making up to $6,500. For the allowable expenses through TABA, again, this sort of acts independently from your standard expenses, so you can use this toward what's generally unallowable. You can spend TABA on intellectual property. You can spend it on market research, market validation, development of certifications and regulatory plans, development of manufacturing plans. And then there's some additional stuff that we have down here. So screening for foreign risk. You can have cybersecurity improvements. You can use it for hiring staff to do some of these things. And you can use it for I-Corps related expenses. So those are some of the new ones down there in addition to previously what was allowable. In your commercialization plan, you'll want to address the market size. And so an easy way to do that is TAM, SAM, SOM. TAM is the total addressable market. SAM is the serviceable addressable market. And then SOM is serviceable obtainable market. And I'll break those down for you. So TAM, two ways to look at this. TAM can be the global market. So total addressable market, if you were a major corporation and you had global reach, how big is the market? And so that's your first number here. And you'll bring that down to SAM. Generally, you would think of this as either the continent that you're on. So you think of North America as your SAM. So how big is the market in North America? You can also break this down and look at it as the country. So how big is the US? How big is their market? And then SOM is, and again, you can look at this a couple different ways, but who can you address today? If you were a fully functional company with the number of employees that you have, how big is a market that you can address right now? And so that's one way to break it down. And you can condense that a little bit. So TAM, instead of being a global market, you can change that to being North America. SAM, you could bring down to the country, and then you can bring SOM down to whether your county or your state. Generally, is how you might think about that. So a couple different ways to address it. However you choose to do your calculations for these numbers, make sure that that's explained in your commercialization plan. So just let the reader know how you're calculating these things. If you wanted to do some work with ChatGPT, here are a couple of ways. We've just got two links here where you can use ChatGPT to help you figure out some of these numbers. Always validate the information that it gives you. So don't just take it and run with it, but go to the sources that it's using, have it provide those for you so you can go and check. I mentioned I-Corps a little bit, and so I actually just had a conversation with our I-Corps representative here in-house. And I-Corps, if you're unfamiliar with it, is essentially is customer discovery, and it is a very structured format for customer discovery. And they have it at a couple of different levels. So there's a local level, there's a regional, and there's a national level for this customer discovery piece. If you are interested in doing customer discovery, I can connect you to Gianna. She'll help us out. But um, it forces you to do these customer interactions and customer interviews that we've talked about. So you'll find out who your customer actually is. You'll figure out through these interviews what their pain points are. You'll figure out through these interviews, what they're willing to spend on a solution to their problems, things like that. You find out if there's a real market interest in what you're doing. Now, these programs aren't very long. I mean, you're looking at, I think, 7 weeks at most. So they're lengthy, but to truly do this, you're going to need to have this as really an iterative process that is almost just continuous. Now, with that, if you make it to nationals, the National Science Foundation does have funding that's $50,000 to support these interviews. And if you go through with them, that's 100 required interviews in that process. I believe Department of Homeland Security follows along with National Science Foundation and how they do it. NIH has 55,000 to help you through the process. NASA has somewhere between 10 and 25,000 to help you through the process. Department of Energy has up to 100,000 for post I-Corps activities. And we can see they're requiring 75 interviews through that process. So if you have an opportunity to go through I-Corps at whichever level, they teach very similar information. And so if you only have a chance to go through it at the local level or potentially at the regional level, you're learning the skills that they're teaching at the national level. So you can still use those skills to work on your business process, to work on that iterative plan, to get the interviews that you need to really solidify the market and to justify moving forward. Any questions about that? Okay, not yet. Um, that's the bulk of what I've got for you. So next week we're going to talk about the agency review process. We're also going to talk about the resources that we have for you here through FAST. So I think next week should be pretty quick. Homework, identify initial target markets, customers, and end users. So think about your innovation. Who's going to be the one to use it? Is the person using it the same person that's going to be purchasing it? It's not always the same. So think about that and think about your markets. So, what industry are you trying to attack? Can you break it down into a sub-market that makes sense for you? Can you start to find some of the numbers for how big those markets are? Think about TAM, SAM. And then identify budget drivers. So I do have some templates for you. I'll put that in the Google Drive, so you'll have access to those. Go ahead and start filling those out. If you are interested in having me take a look or you want to discuss any of that, please feel free to email any of these pieces to me so that I can take a look at it and we can talk about it. Schedule meetings with me if you'd like, and we can talk about this specifically for your business in more detail. But that is all I've got for you this week. I keep listing Apex accelerators up here. If you need any help with registering through sam.gov, those are the people to work with. If you find out, of course, at the end of this, that SBIR maybe isn't the absolute best fit for you, you can still talk to Apex accelerators. They do look at a broader range of funding opportunities, so they might be able to find something that's a little bit different for you. That's what I've got. I'll stick around for some questions if you've got them. Otherwise, I will see you next week.
John, I have a question. So I'm sorry, very short. So when you're requesting to start filling out the budget template, is that budget for SBIR phase one, or what do you mean by budget?
It's a budget for SBIR phase one. I believe that the template is based on NSF. And so the budget ceiling that you see in there might be different, but the template that we have created is interactive so that, as you type things in, new cells will pop up and it'll highlight, where you might need more justification, things like that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the information.
Absolutely.
John, I have a question about the I-Corps funding. Is that something that you apply for, like when in the process can you apply for that?
Absolutely. So it depends. If you are interested in doing a local or a regional version of I-Corps, they offer their own funding amounts. And so what we saw on the screen, the 50,000, um, is going to be much less than that. And so if you're interested, I can put you in contact with Gianna, who runs our I-Corps stuff, and she can give you more information about it. But if you're interested in the national I-Corps, you would need to, and I'll back up to that slide. So each of these agencies that's offering funding for it, you'll need to have an SBIR award with them already to be able to apply directly for this funding through their I-Corps process. Um, if you're there's so that's one way to go through it is if you have, and I was just talking to Gianna about the NSF version. If you have an NSF SBIR already, you can go straight to their national version. If you start out and you go through the either local or the regional version first, they can recommend you to the national version. You'll need to have some kind of university affiliation. So either have them as a subaward or connected to university or intellectual property that's coming out of a university, something like that, as I understand. But you can go through the regional version, and then they will recommend you to the national version, and then you can get this funding for that as well.
And so if you do it that way, you don't need to have an SBIR?
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah, I think I would like to be connected to Gianna at some point. Don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but if it's something, information you could send me.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I put her contact in the follow-up email for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think this is the second time where you went, oh, maybe I'm not quite ready yet. And I don't want to push you to doing things that you don't feel like you're quite ready for. But if you reach out and have those conversations, you at least know if you are or how far away you sit from being ready. So I mean, there's a chance that you're ready now. And you don't.
Yeah, and I apologize, I did not send you my homework. I was still kind of filling it out, but I do want to send it to you and then get your feedback on that. Maybe tomorrow if you're available.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yep. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.